She wore her late husband's frayed combat jacket to their son's graduation. The event coordinator called it unfit and had her removed. But inside, his entire Force Recon team was about to teach everyone a lesson in true honor. Elena Rivera's 1998 Chevrolet Silverado rumbled into the parking lot of Paris Island, its engine coughing once before settling into a grudging silence. She sat for a long moment, her knuckles white on the cracked vinyl of the steering wheel, taking in the scene. A sea of gleaming, modern SUVs and luxury sedans reflected the South Carolina sun, their polished surfaces a stark contrast to her truck's faded blue paint and the rust creeping along its wheel wells. In this world of spit-shined perfection, her old Chevy seemed to shrink, an unwanted ghost from a forgotten time. "Just breathe, Elena," she whispered, her own voice a small, grounding presence in the cavernous cab. "This is for Leo. This is his day." She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 45, life had carved its map onto her face. Fine lines radiated from the corners of her eyes, a permanent furrow was etched between her brows from 2 decades of worry, and her skin was weathered from years spent working outdoors, fixing fences and tending to a small plot of land that barely broke even. She'd done her best today, a touch of mascara to brighten her tired eyes and her dark, gray-streaked hair pulled back into a simple, neat bun. But it was the jacket that gave her pause. The M65 Woodland camouflage combat jacket had belonged to her husband, Marcus. It was too large for her slender frame, the shoulders broad and the sleeves a little too long, but it hung on her like an embrace from the past. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows and the cuffs were frayed, the colors of the camouflage muted from countless washes and years of sun. Wearing it made her feel like Marcus was with her, a silent, proud presence watching their son graduate from the crucible that had forged him. She felt the familiar weight on her shoulders not as a burden, but as a shield. Her fingers found the small, cool object hanging from a silver chain around her neck, tucked beneath the jacket's collar. It was a St. Michael medallion, the patron saint of warriors. It had been Marcus's. Today, it was her gift for Leo. An heirloom. A prayer. "We did it, mi amor," she murmured, her gaze distant. "Our boy. He made it." Stepping out of the truck, she smoothed down the front of the jacket and retrieved the medallion, letting it rest in her palm for a moment before tucking it safely into a pocket. The walk toward the grand, imposing entrance of the graduation hall felt like crossing a border into another country. Families flowed around her in a river of formal attire, women in bright summer dresses and elegant heels, men in tailored suits or crisp service uniforms, their laughter and confident chatter filling the air. Elena felt their glances. Some were merely curious, a quick flicker of appraisal. Others were more pointed, lingering on her worn work boots and the faded military jacket that was so clearly out of place amidst the polished brass and starched whites. She lifted her chin, clutching her printed invitation in one hand, her posture straight. She had as much right to be here as any of them. More, she thought, a fierce, protective pride swelling in her chest. The wide marble steps leading to the entrance felt like climbing a monument. At the top, 2 Marines in immaculate dress blues flanked the heavy oak doors, their expressions professional and welcoming. As Elena approached, however, their practiced smiles tightened. Their eyes swept over her, from her sensible boots to the jacket that hung on her like a relic. "Invitation, ma'am," one of them asked, his tone clipped, losing the warmth he'd offered the family just ahead of her. Elena offered a small, hopeful smile. "Yes. I'm here for Private First Class Leo Rivera. I'm his mother." She held out the invitation. The Marine took it, his gaze moving from the paper to her jacket, then back again. A flicker of something, doubt, or perhaps disdain, crossed his face before he masked it with professional neutrality. "One moment, ma'am. Please wait over here." He gestured to a roped-off area to the side of the main flow of traffic. Elena nodded, her stomach tightening. She stepped aside, watching as family after family streamed past, their invitations barely glanced at before they were waved through with a respectful nod. The clock above the entrance ticked loudly in the sudden silence of her solitary wait. 5 minutes stretched into 10. The warmth of the sun felt oppressive, the cheerful sounds of celebration now grating on her nerves. Finally, a woman with a severe haircut and a navy blue blazer approached, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. She held a tablet, her expression one of harassed efficiency. "Mrs. Rivera?" she asked, her eyes scanning the tablet before flicking up to assess Elena. "Yes, that's me," Elena replied, a surge of relief making her feel lightheaded. "Is everything all right?" The woman's eyes, cold and gray as a winter sky, performed a slow, deliberate inventory of Elena's appearance. They lingered on the frayed cuffs of the jacket, the faded camouflage, and her worn boots with visible disapproval. "Your invitation is valid, Mrs. Rivera," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "However, I'm afraid we have a dress code for this ceremony. It is a formal military event." Elena's fragile smile faltered. I don't understand. Your attire," the woman stated, as if speaking to a child, "is simply not appropriate for this occasion." A cold knot formed in Elena's stomach. Her hand instinctively went to the lapel of the jacket, her fingers tracing the worn, familiar fabric. "This was my husband's jacket," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He was a Marine. He was killed in Afghanistan wearing this." The statement hung in the air, heavy and raw. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of hesitation in the woman's eyes, but it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an iron wall of institutional resolve. "While I appreciate the sentiment, Mrs. Rivera," the woman, whose name tag read Evelyn Reed, event coordinator, replied coolly, "Policy is policy. We have standards to maintain. The decorum of a United States Marine Corps graduation ceremony is paramount. I cannot make exceptions." "But, my son is the honor graduate," Elena protested, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. Panic began to bubble in her chest, hot and sharp. "He's expecting me. I drove 10 hours to be here. Please." Before she could say more, 2 uniformed base security personnel materialized at Ms. Reed's side, summoned by a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. They were large men, their expressions impassive, their presence immediately intimidating. "Please escort Mrs. Rivera off the premises," Ms. Reed instructed them, her voice low and final, turning away before Elena could even process the words. She was already focused on her tablet again, dismissing Elena as if she were a piece of litter to be cleared away. "Ma'am, please come with us," one of the guards said, his tone professional but unyielding. He reached for her arm. Elena pulled back instinctively. "No. My son, he won't understand. He'll think I didn't come." The commotion was starting to draw stares. Families paused on their way into the hall, their joyful expressions turning to curiosity. Whispers erupted behind raised hands. Some people looked away, embarrassed for her. Others watched with a kind of detached fascination, as if observing a scene in a play. Elena's face burned with a hot, spreading shame. Each curious glance felt like a physical blow. The guards took her arms more firmly this time, their grip a vice of polite, unmovable authority. "Ma'am, please don't make a scene," the second guard murmured, his voice close to her ear. "We're just doing our job." They began to lead her away from the grand entrance, back down the marble steps she had climbed with so much hope only minutes before. "Please," she begged, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Just let me wait somewhere. I don't have to go inside. I just want to see him afterward." Her pleas were met with silence. They were taking her past the manicured lawns, away from the sounds of the band that had begun to play inside the hall. As they passed a side entrance, Elena caught the eye of a grizzled-looking Marine with Master Gunnery Sergeant chevrons on his sleeve. His gaze briefly fell on the familiar M65 jacket, and his eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second in what looked like recognition. But the moment was fleeting. Before he could react, the guards had steered her around a corner, out of sight. They finally stopped near the edge of the parking lot, the asphalt shimmering in the heat. They released her arms. "You can retrieve your vehicle now, Ma." "I'm sorry about this," the first guard said, his voice softer now that they were away from the watchful eyes of the event staff. Elena stood frozen, watching them walk away. The grand hall stood in the distance, a monument to a moment she was now locked out of. The full weight of what had just happened crashed down on her. She would miss her only son's graduation. She wouldn't hear his name called. She wouldn't see him march, tall and proud, a United States Marine. She found her way to a simple stone bench under the shade of a live oak tree, far from the entrance. She sank onto it, the strength draining from her limbs. Her hand went to her pocket and closed around the cool metal of the St. Michael medallion. The watch inside James's graduation watch, the only family heirloom she had to pass on to their son. 20 years of raising Leo alone, working 2 jobs, scrimping and saving every penny, it had all led to this. To being cast out like a beggar. Tears she had refused to shed in front of them now burned at the back of her eyes. She stared at the closed doors of the hall, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She was alone, humiliated, and utterly, devastatingly defeated. The heavy oak doors had closed, and with them, the world that held her son's greatest triumph. Inside the vast, echoing hall, the air was thick with pride and anticipation. Rows upon rows of families sat with cameras poised, their faces beaming. On the stage, a line of decorated officers stood at parade rest, their uniforms a dazzling display of medals and ribbons under the bright lights. The ceremony proceeded with the flawless precision the Marine Corps is known for. The commanding officer of Paris Island delivered a powerful speech about honor, courage, and commitment. Finally, the moment arrived. "It is my distinct honor," the announcer's voice boomed, "to introduce this year's company honor graduate. This Marine has distinguished himself through exceptional leadership, academic excellence, and the highest standards of physical fitness. Private First Class Leo Rivera." A wave of applause swept through the auditorium as a tall, powerfully built young man in his crisp dress blues strode to the podium. Leo Rivera moved with the fluid, coiled grace of a predator, his posture immaculate, his expression a mask of serious composure. But as he stood before the crowd, his dark eyes began a methodical scan of the audience, moving row by row, section by section. He was searching. In the front row of the VIP section, reserved for distinguished veterans and guests, Master Gunnery Sergeant Gunny Cole sat with his arms crossed over his chest. His face was a roadmap of a life lived hard, carved by desert sun and mountain wind. He'd known Leo's father, Marcus Rivera, had served with him in the Badlands of Helmand Province. He'd watched young Leo grow up from a distance, seeing the same fire in his eyes that had burned in his father's. Gunny noticed the subtle tension in the young Marine's jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as his search of the crowd continued, fruitless. Something was wrong. A Marine, especially one as disciplined as Leo, didn't let his mask slip on a day like this unless something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Leo cleared his throat, the sound amplified throughout the silent hall. He began his address, his voice strong and clear, betraying none of the concern that Gunny could now plainly see churning behind his eyes. "Distinguished guests, commanding officers, fellow Marines, and family," he said, pausing for a fraction of a second on the last word as his eyes made one final, desperate sweep across the sea of faces. "It is an honor to stand before you today. This day is not the end of a journey, but the beginning. We were told that Paris Island would break us, and then remake us. It kept its promise." Outside, Elena remained on the stone bench, a solitary figure under the hanging Spanish moss. She could hear the faint, muffled sound of a voice from the hall, but the words were indistinct. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No texts. Leo would be speaking now, or soon. He would be looking for her. The thought sent a fresh wave of pain through her. She considered leaving, just getting in her old truck and starting the long, lonely drive back to the small farm that was all she had left. What was the point of staying? But she couldn't. She had promised Leo she would be here. Even if she was on the outside looking in, she would keep her promise. Back at the podium, Leo's speech had taken a personal turn. Everything I am today, I owe to two people. My father, who gave his life for this country and this corps. And my mother, who spent the last 20 years working her fingers to the bone to raise me after he was gone. Gunny Cole's attention sharpened. His gaze locked onto the young Marine on the stage. My father taught me about duty through his ultimate sacrifice, Leo continued, his voice resonating with emotion. But my mother, she taught me about perseverance through her daily example. She never asked for recognition. She never complained about the hardships. And she never, ever stopped believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Leo paused again, a longer, more noticeable hesitation this time. His composure was wavering, his discomfort now palpable to anyone paying close attention. She promised she would be here today. The words, spoken with a quiet strain, struck Gunny Cole like a lightning bolt. He saw it all in an instant, the proud, searching son on the stage, and the brief, unsettling image he'd seen earlier of a woman in a familiar, old M65 jacket being escorted away by security. The woman Leo's mother. Marcus's wife. Without drawing attention to himself, his movements fluid and economical from decades of practice, Gunny Cole quietly stood. He slipped out of his seat and made his way to a side exit, his expression hardening from one of quiet observation to cold, focused purpose. His fellow veterans in the front row watched him go, their curiosity piqued. Gunny didn't move without a reason, and his reasons were never trivial. The humid South Carolina air hit Gunny Cole as he stepped outside. His eyes, accustomed to scanning for threats in far-off, dangerous places, quickly swept the manicured grounds. He spotted her almost immediately, a lone figure on a distant bench, small and still beneath the sprawling branches of a live oak. He started walking toward her, his stride long and purposeful. Elena didn't look up until his shadow fell over her. She saw the polished black shoes first, then the immaculate dress blue trousers with their distinctive red blood stripe. Her gaze traveled up to the chest full of ribbons, and finally to the weathered, grimly set face of the master gunnery sergeant. "Mrs. Rivera?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Elena looked up, startled. "Yes." Gunny's eyes moved from her face to the jacket she wore. A flicker of recognition, sharp and profound, crossed his features. He didn't see a piece of inappropriate attire, he saw a ghost. He saw history. "That's Marcus's jacket," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. The gruffness in his voice was tempered with a deep, unmistakable respect. "Still looks the same." Elena's eyes widened. She slowly got to her feet, clutching the pocket with the medallion inside. You knew my husband." "Knew him?" Gunny's lips twisted into a wry, sad smile. "Ma'am, Marcus Rivera saved my life back in '04. Operation Vigilant Star. He pulled me out of a collapsed building under heavy fire." He tapped a faded scar above his eyebrow. "I owe him a debt I can never repay. We never forget our brothers." The name of the operation, a secret she had never been told, resonated deep within her. The stories Marcus had never been able to share. "You're Gunny Cole," she whispered, the name finally clicking into place from old, vague letters. "Marcus wrote about you. He said you were the toughest Marine he ever knew." "He was the bravest," Gunny replied simply. He gestured back toward the hall. "So why are you out here, Mrs. Rivera? Your son is on that stage right now, pouring his heart out." When Elena explained what had happened, the dress code, Ms. Reed's cold dismissal, the humiliation of being escorted out, the relaxed lines around Gunny's eyes hardened into something formidable. The calm, observant veteran disappeared, replaced by the lethal focus of a warrior who has just identified an enemy. An injustice. He didn't waste time with outrage or apologies. He acted. "Come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He offered her his arm, a gesture of old-world chivalry that seemed both out of place and perfectly natural for him. He escorted her back toward the main entrance, his presence a shield around her. The same two security guards who had removed her saw them coming and stepped forward, their expressions a mixture of alarm and confusion. "Sir, this woman has been," one of them began, but the words died in his throat. Gunny Cole didn't even break stride. He just looked at them, his eyes like chips of granite. "She's with me," he said. The authority in those 3 words was absolute. It was the voice of a man who had led other men into battle, a voice that expected and received instant obedience. The guards immediately stood aside, their protests forgotten, their posture shifting to one of deference. They entered the hall through a side door, slipping into the shadows at the back of the auditorium. The air inside was electric. Elena could hear her son's voice clearly now, strong and resonant, speaking of the values that define a Marine. She saw him on the stage, tall and straight, so much like his father that it stole her breath and brought fresh tears to her eyes. Gunny guided her to a spot just inside the entrance, out of sight of most of the audience, but where she had a clear, unobstructed view. From the front row, the other Force Recon veterans saw Gunny return. They saw the woman with him, the woman in the familiar, faded M65 jacket. An unspoken message passed between them, a ripple of understanding that needed no words. The tide was about to turn. On stage, Leo was nearing the end of his speech, his voice tight with controlled emotion as he spoke about the Marine Corps ethos. This ethos teaches us that our loyalty is to our nation, our Corps, and to each other. We do not leave our brothers, or our sisters, behind. Ever. This principle extends beyond the battlefield. It extends to our families. Gunny Cole returned to his seat in the front row. He leaned over and whispered a few words to the veteran sitting next to him. That man leaned to the next, and the message passed down the line of grizzled warriors like a silent, inexorable command. Their expressions, one by one, hardened into masks of grim solidarity. Colonel Vance, the base commander presiding over the ceremony from the stage, watched this silent communication with a puzzled frown, but maintained his official composure. And then, it happened. Starting with Gunny Cole, in a single, perfectly synchronized movement, every one of the 24 Force Recon veterans in the front rows rose to their feet. They didn't applaud. They didn't shout. They simply stood, silent and at attention, a unified block of living history. The action was so sudden, so unexpected, that Leo stopped mid-sentence. The rustling and coughing of the 1,000-strong audience ceased. A profound, ringing silence fell over the massive hall. Every head turned, trying to understand this unprecedented breach of protocol. The veterans were not facing the stage. They were facing the rear of the auditorium. They were facing the shadows where Elena stood. Their message, though silent, was as clear and loud as a cannon blast. Colonel Vance stepped forward to the microphone, his face a mixture of confusion and authority. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole," he said, his voice tense, "what is the meaning of this?" Gunny didn't turn. He addressed the colonel, but his voice carried through the silent room, intended for every ear. "Apologies for the interruption, Colonel," he responded, his tone deceptively calm but laced with an undercurrent of cold fury. "But a dishonorable action has been taken against the family of one of our fallen brothers." Ms. Reed, the event coordinator, rushed from the wings of the stage, her face pale, her professional veneer cracking. "Colonel, this is completely disrupting the ceremony. I must insist." "That woman you had removed," Gunny cut in, his voice dropping an octave, each word a hammer blow, "is Private Rivera's mother. And her husband, Sergeant Marcus Rivera, died wearing that jacket while saving my team on a classified mission 20 years ago. The same jacket you decided was too shabby for this ceremony." A collective gasp went through the audience. Every eye in the auditorium swung from Gunny, to the stage, and then to the horrified, chalk-white face of Evelyn Reed. Colonel Vance's expression transformed from confusion to thunderous rage. He was a combat veteran himself, and the implication of Gunny's words struck him to the core. He turned a withering glare on Ms. Reed, who looked as if the ground might swallow her whole. Then he looked to the back of the hall. "Bring her forward," the colonel ordered, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Bring Mrs. Rivera to the front. With full honors. Now." At the rear of the auditorium, Elena stood frozen, overwhelmed. The veterans remained standing, their gazes fixed on her, a silent, unyielding honor guard. "They're standing for you, Mrs. Rivera," Gunny's voice seemed to echo in her mind. "For you. And for Marcus." Two young officers quickly appeared at her side, their expressions full of awe and respect. They flanked her, not as guards, but as formal escorts. As she was guided down the center aisle, a path magically clearing before her, each veteran she passed rendered a slow, solemn salute. It was a corridor of honor, built for the woman who had been deemed unworthy only an hour before. The audience, now understanding the full story through the whispers spreading like wildfire through the rows, rose to their feet as one, their applause starting as a trickle and growing into a thunderous, heartfelt ovation. From the stage, Leo watched, his own composure finally breaking. He broke protocol, stepping away from the podium and striding down the steps to meet his mother halfway down the aisle. When they embraced, the applause swelled, a wave of emotion washing over them, for them. "You came," Leo whispered into her hair, his voice thick with tears. "I promised," Elena replied, her own voice steady, anchored by the impossible reality of the moment. "I always keep my promises." Colonel Vance himself descended from the stage to personally escort Elena to the empty seat of honor in the very front row, the seat that had been reserved for her all along. As Leo returned to the podium, he stood taller, the pride and love for his mother shining in his eyes. He looked at the crowd, then at his mother, and then at the silent, standing brotherhood of veterans who had righted a terrible wrong. "As I was saying," he continued, his voice ringing with new strength, "true strength isn't about appearances. It's about sacrifice, perseverance, and honor. Values my parents taught me long before I ever dreamed of wearing this uniform." The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of pride and vindication. When Leo's name was called again to receive his awards, the applause was deafening. He walked past the row of standing veterans, and each man gave him a nod of profound respect, a silent confirmation that he was now one of them, the son of their fallen brother. At the reception that followed, the atmosphere buzzed not just with celebration, but with the story that had unfolded. Elena, still wearing the M65 jacket, found herself at the center of a circle of respect she could never have imagined. Senior officers, their wives, and young Marines all came to pay their respects, not just to Leo, but to her. The jacket was no longer a mark of an outsider, it was a badge of honor. Across the room, Gunny Cole watched with a rare, small smile. He had settled his debt. "Mrs. Rivera?" A deep voice broke through the chatter. Elena turned to see a distinguished, silver-haired man in a wheelchair, his chest a constellation of medals that spoke of a lifetime of service. Leo was at his side. "Mom, this is General Peterson, retired," Leo said, his voice full of reverence. He was Dad's commanding officer. Elena's heart skipped a beat. "General," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been wanting to meet you for a very long time, Elena," the general said, his eyes kind. "Your husband was one of the finest Marines I ever had the privilege to command. A true hero." He gestured for them to follow him. "There are some people who need to speak with you." Curious, Elena followed as Leo wheeled the general into a small, private conference room. Inside, a group of men stood waiting. Men of varying ages, but they all shared the same unmistakable bearing of quiet confidence and latent danger that marked them as special operations. "Elena," the general began, "these men served with Marcus. Some were with him on his final mission. Due to the classified nature of their work, they were never able to contact you. For 20 years, she had lived with a black hole of unanswered questions." A man in his 60s, with a face as weathered as Gunny's, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm retired Commander Reynolds. I was the team leader on Operation Vigilant Star. He took a deep breath. There's something you need to know. The official report, the training accident, it was a cover story. We couldn't tell you the truth then, but the operation was declassified last month. Elena felt Leo's hand on her elbow, steadying her. Marcus didn't die in an accident, Reynolds continued, his voice thick with memory. He died saving 14 civilian hostages, 3 of them children. He drew enemy fire to himself to give them, and us, time to get to the extraction point. He made the choice. He died a hero. Another man stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. For his actions that day, Sergeant Rivera was posthumously awarded this, he said, opening the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of blue velvet, was the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat. Tears streamed freely down Elena's face as she looked from the medal to her son, whose own eyes shone with a fierce, tear-filled pride. He hadn't just lost his father to an accident, he had lost him to an act of supreme sacrifice. I think Dad would want you to have it, Mom, Leo said softly. You fought your own battles for the last 20 years. As the story of her husband's final moments finally filled the void in her heart, Gunny Cole stepped forward. He held a small, new patch in his hand, the Force Recon insignia, but with a single, small gold star embroidered in the corner. A gold star family patch. That jacket belonged to our brother, Gunny said with quiet ceremony. We'd be honored if you'd allow us to update it. With trembling hands, Elena held still as Gunny carefully pinned a patch onto the shoulder of the old M65 jacket. In that moment, a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying lifted from her. The sense of isolation, of being the one left behind, dissolved. Surrounded by her husband's brothers in arms, she was finally home. You were never alone, Mrs. Rivera, Gunny said, as if reading her thoughts. We just weren't very good at showing it. Until today. Later, as they walked through the now empty reception hall, Elena saw Evelyn Reed standing hesitantly by the exit. The woman's earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a deep, genuine remorse. Mrs. Rivera, she began, there are no words to express how sorry I am. Elena looked at the woman who had caused her so much pain. She thought of Marcus, of Leo, of the honor she had been shown. Holding on to anger felt like a betrayal of the grace she had received. We all make mistakes, Elena said, her voice gentle. Today turned out to be more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. As they drove away from Paris Island in the old Chevy, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery colors, Elena glanced in the rearview mirror at the grand buildings receding in the distance. The jacket felt different now. It was no longer just a memory of what she had lost, but a symbol of everything she was a part of. The gold star patch on the shoulder caught the last rays of light, a small, shining beacon. She was not just a widow. She was the mother of a Marine. And she was, and always had been, part of the family. The quiet heroes whose stories are rarely told, but whose strength is the bedrock of them all. This story is a tribute to the strength and resilience of military families everywhere. Their sacrifices often go unseen, but their honor is immeasurable. If this story touched you, please share it and subscribe for more content that celebrates these unsung heroes. What does true honor mean to you? Let us know in the comments. Please, comment with respect for all the families who sacrifice in silence.